I was 15 years old when my own father shoved me out the front door, right into the middle of a torrential downpour, yelling, "Get out. I don't need a sick daughter." All because of a single, calculated lie from my older sister. I stood on the soaking pavement as their taillights disappeared, freezing, gasping for breath, and completely alone. But what my family didn't know was that 3 hours later, a phone call from the city hospital would force them to race to my bedside. And when my father walked into that room, expecting to find a broken girl with no options left, he stopped dead in his tracks. His jaw dropped, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking when he saw the powerful figure sitting right beside me, the one person he spent his entire life fearing. Make sure to follow my story to the very end, and comment down below which city you're watching from so I can see how far my journey has reached. My name is Clara, and today I'm 27 years old. Looking back, it feels like I grew up in a house built out of cold glass, a place where everyone could see us, but no one ever truly felt warm. From the day I was born, there was a strict, unwritten rule in our home. My older sister, Evelyn, was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was simply the invisible burden. Evelyn was 3 years older than me, polished, charming, and a master at playing the perfect daughter. My parents doted on her every breath, celebrating her smallest accomplishments as if she'd conquered the world. I, on the other hand, was the quiet daughter who suffered from chronic health struggles. To my parents, my frequent illness wasn't something to treat with compassion. It was an embarrassing inconvenience, a flaw in their image of a perfect suburban family. I spent my childhood trying to blend into the wallpaper, doing everything I could to avoid drawing my father's sharp temper or my mother's cold, disappointed sighs. If a dish broke, it was my clumsiness. If Evelyn failed a test, it was because my medical needs had distracted the household. I quickly learned that in my family, love wasn't unconditional, it was a currency, and I was perpetually bankrupt. But I never imagined just how far Evelyn would go to protect her privileged status, or how easily my parents would throw me away when the storm finally hit. By the time I turned 15, the dynamic in our house had reached a boiling point. Evelyn was 18 and headed to an expensive private university, a luxury my parents could barely afford, but proudly funded anyway. To pay for her tuition and maintain their fragile image of upper-class success, my father had taken out a massive business loan, keeping an envelope stuffed with thousands of dollars in cash locked inside the wooden drawer of his home office. That money was supposed to be Evelyn's first semester tuition payment, due the following morning. But Evelyn had a secret. She had developed a habit of sneaking out to local underground poker games, convinced she was smart enough to beat the odds. She wasn't. 2 nights before the payment was due, she lost over $4,000 to people who didn't take excuses for an answer. Desperate to cover her tracks, Evelyn broke into our father's desk while everyone was asleep and stole the remaining cash from the envelope. But she knew she couldn't just hide the missing money, someone had to take the fall. The next morning, the house exploded into chaos. My father's furious roars echoed down the hallway when he discovered the empty envelope. Panic turned to outright rage. While I stood in the kitchen, pale and trembling from a sudden flare-up of my illness, Evelyn walked into the room with tears streaming down her face. She looked directly at our parents, pointed a shaking finger at me, and delivered the lie that would destroy my life. She claimed she'd caught me sneaking out of Dad's office late at night, whispering that I'd been complaining for weeks about needing money for my medical bills. I stood there, paralyzed, as my parents' eyes locked onto me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I tried to speak, to beg them to listen, but the words choked in my throat as my father closed the distance between us. His face was twisted in a mask of disgust I'd never seen before. There was no trial, no demand for proof, no hesitation. My mother didn't even look at me, she just turned her back, wrapping her arms around Evelyn to comfort her as if she were the victim. "You ungrateful, sick little parasite," my father roared, grabbing my arm so hard it left bruises. "We sacrifice everything for this family, and you steal from your own sister." I tried to tell him about my chest pain, about how I could barely breathe, but he dragged me down the hallway toward the front entrance. Outside, the sky had turned pitch black, and a sudden, violent rainstorm was battering the windows. Downpours like that were rare, but the rain was coming down in sheets, heavy and unrelenting. He threw open the front door. The icy wind hit me like a slap. "Get out," he screamed, shoving me out onto the soaking porch. "I don't need a sick daughter ruining this home. Don't you dare come back." The door slammed shut, and the deadbolt clicked into place. I stumbled off the steps, falling onto the cold, wet pavement as the heavy rain drenched my clothes within seconds. My lungs seized, and the world began to spin. Slipping onto the muddy sidewalk, I watched their house lights fade through my tears, completely abandoned in the dark. I don't know how long I lay on that freezing sidewalk, the rain pounding against my aching body, but just as my vision began to fade into total darkness, two bright headlights cut through the storm. A sleek, dark sedan pulled over to the curb, its tires splashing heavy water onto the pavement. The door opened, and a tall man in a tailored coat stepped out into the pouring rain. He didn't hesitate for a second. Kneeling beside me, he checked my pulse, wrapped his warm, heavy jacket around my shivering shoulders, and lifted me into the back seat. Through my haze of pain and exhaustion, I caught a glimpse of his silver hair and the stone, worried expression on his face. He dialed a number on his phone, his voice steady and commanding as he told the driver to head straight to the city hospital's emergency ward. That man was Arthur Vance. He was an influential, immensely wealthy real estate tycoon who practically built the city's commercial district. But more importantly, he was my father's bitterest, most feared rival. Years ago, my father had tried to ruin Arthur's business through a series of shady, underhanded legal maneuvers, a betrayal Arthur had never forgotten. While the ER doctors stabilized my breathing and hooked me up to N4, Arthur sat quietly in a chair beside my bed. As I slowly regained consciousness, I tearfully poured my heart out, telling him everything about Evelyn's lie, my father's rage, and how they threw me into the storm. Arthur listened, his expression shifting from calm concern to a cold, razor-sharp fury. "Your father thought he could discard you, Clara," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, quiet vow. "He was wrong. You will never have to fear him again." Because I was a minor brought into the emergency room suffering from severe exposure and neglect, the hospital staff called the police, who immediately tracked down my parents and summoned them to the facility. An hour later, the heavy doors of my private room swung open. My father marched in first, his face set in a stone, practiced frown, ready to play the frustrated parent dealing with a rebellious, troubled teenager. Evelyn and my mother trailed right behind him, rehearsing their look of quiet disappointment. "Clara, this ridiculous drama ends right now," my father snapped, stepping toward my bed without even checking my vitals. "You are coming home to face the consequences of what you stole, or so help me." He froze. From the shadows of the corner armchair, Arthur Vance slowly stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. The color completely drained from my father's face, turning him a ghostly, sickly white. His mouth hung open, his hands beginning to shake violently as he recognized the one man who possessed enough financial power and legal backing to crush his entire life with a single phone call. "V. Vance," my father stammered, taking an involuntary step back. What are you doing here?" Arthur stepped between my father and my hospital bed, towering over him with a cold, terrifying calm. "I am here protecting a child you threw into a storm like trash," Arthur said, his voice echoing off the sterile walls like a thunderclap. "And if you take one more step toward her, George, I will ensure every authority in this state knows exactly what kind of monster you are." My father stood paralyzed, staring at his worst enemy standing guard over the daughter he had just discarded. Arthur didn't just give me shelter, he brought in his personal legal team to expose the truth. Within 48 hours, the police audited the paper trail surrounding my father's business loan and reviewed local surveillance footage near the underground gambling den. It didn't take long for Evelyn's story to completely collapse under pressure. Faced with actual investigators, Evelyn broke down in tears and confessed to stealing the tuition money to pay off her gambling debts. The fallout was swift and brutal. My father's reputation was utterly destroyed in our community, and the loan company immediately called in his debts, putting his business on the brink of bankruptcy. Panicked and facing total ruin, my parents tried to stage a desperate reconciliation. They showed up at Arthur's estate, sobbing, making excuses, and begging me to return home so Arthur would drop his legal pressure. My mother tried to hug me, claiming it was all a terrible misunderstanding and that they had always loved me. I stood on the marble porch of Arthur's home, looking at the three people who had thrown me away without a second thought. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid, nor did I feel the need to seek their approval. I calmly told them that the girl they dragged out into the rain was dead, and I signed the emancipation papers Arthur's lawyers had prepared. I officially cut all ties with them, leaving my parents to face the financial and social consequences of their own choices alone. Looking back now at 27, that terrible night in the rain feels like a lifetime ago. With Arthur's mentorship and guidance, I received the medical care I desperately needed, completed my education, and built a successful career of my own, entirely free from the shadows of my past. My family tried several times over the years to reach out, mostly when their financial struggles deepened, but I never looked back. Blood doesn't make a family. Love, protection, and respect do. Standing up for myself that day was the hardest thing I ever had to do, but it gave me a life I am truly proud of. If you enjoyed this story and found inspiration in standing up for what's right, please consider giving this video a like, sharing your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribing to the channel for more incredible stories like this. Thank you for watching, and remember that no matter how dark the storm gets, you are always strong enough to survive it.